me she's not happy. Like, I hate myself. And I was like, oh, okay. I've built the dream life, literally, and I just felt so unhappy. But something's missing. Why you might not feel fulfilled even when life looks good. Welcome to Conversations on a Fulfilled Life. I'm Viv, your host. I'm a life strategist and creator of the Fulfilled Life Method. My background is in medical science, trauma therapy, and the deeper psychology of how people actually change and transform. And this show is where we explore what it actually means to live a truly fulfilled life. Because life looking good on the outside is not the same thing as life feeling good on the inside always. And this show is about what makes that difference. This is actually our first episode. This is a new podcast. Each episode I'll sit down with people from all walks of life. Some you'll recognize, some you won't. But we'll talk about how they actually live, what fulfillment means to them, what shaped them. Others will be solo episodes like this one with me now. So I recently had this conversation with my friend where she told me she's not happy. And she has a great marriage, super happy marriage, totally in love. She even told me she's just as in love today as she was on the first day. She has a wonderful 4-year-old son, great relationship, great job, lives in a great location, but something's missing. This episode today is about what she discovered, what I discovered or reflected on after our conversation, and the two things that almost nobody names when they're feeling unfulfilled. If you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Today I want to talk about why so many people don't feel fulfilled, even when life looks good on the outside. This is really common, and it's something I've been thinking about all week. After a TED Talk, a conversation with a friend, it all pointed me towards the same ideas. The two things that most unhappy people are missing. So let's get into it. So this all started when I was doing my morning walk. I like to listen to podcasts and things like that. But I was actually listening to a TED Talk by Dr. Robert Waldinger, who was in charge of the world's longest study on happiness so far. And that's been running, at the time of the talk, he said it was 75 years. I think it's about 80 years now, if I'm not mistaken. And it was a fascinating research study where they looked at two groups of men, because back then they didn't study women, but now they're including women. But nevertheless, it was very interesting. They looked at two groups of men, one from Harvard, obviously a special type of background, and then contrasted that with a group from, the most disadvantaged type of background. I think it was in Boston where they pulled the second group from as well. And it was a very large sample size. He really stressed that there was just one main finding that they found. And it didn't matter from what background you were. The most important predictor of happiness and health, they're related, was the quality of your closest relationships in your 50s. He said was the largest predictor of happiness and health in your 80s, right? So of course, this is important and relevant across the whole lifespan. However, when you're dealing with scientists and science, you got to kind of measure it, right? So pick some items you want to measure. So his whole message was that it's about relationships, and that really got me thinking about that, because there are people who have even great relationships who are still struggling. And so we're going to get into that later. But then as I continued on my walk, I was listening to Arthur Brooks' podcast. I love him. He's a wonderful researcher on happiness. He teaches a course on happiness at the Harvard School of Business. And he also has a wonderful podcast. And he was talking about his definition of happiness. And he defined happiness with 3 criteria. So enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning, which I thought was interesting. It maps and agrees with a lot of research in positive psychology. That would be my definition for what I call fulfillment and deep life satisfaction. But what was most interesting was how he broke down the enjoyment part, right? So you need enjoyment, you need satisfaction, and you need meaning to be happy or fulfilled. But when you break down enjoying your life, because a lot of my clients and what they struggle with is not feeling like they're really enjoying their lives all that much. And we're not just talking about fleeting pleasure, but like really enjoying your life, And so he broke down enjoyment into 3 components, which are pleasure, people, and memory. And this is interesting because he mentioned that if you are engaging in something that's pleasurable, but it's alone, you're in scary territory, like, drinking vodka by yourself in the bathroom. No, that's weird. But, I shouldn't laugh. I know obviously that can be a serious issue for people or whatever it is, but that's the thing. That's where you kind of traverse into addictions. And this also can be like scrolling on social media. You get pleasure from scrolling on social media or binging on Netflix. But if you're doing it alone and you're not creating memories, like important, long-lasting happy memories, then you're not actually enjoying yourself, which is why a lot of people feel guilty for doing those things and it doesn't really make them happy. So that was really a cool distinction about enjoyment, that you have to have. Again, I'm repeating this again because I really think like we can't keep this in mind enough. Enjoyment needs pleasure, people, and memory. So we're creating memories, which if you kind of combine it with the last thing that I was talking about that Waldinger found in that really long happiness study, he said you need to have close relationships and like good quality close relationships. And then I thought, well, what if you're not enjoying your time with these people you love? Because you could have a really great marriage or a good relationship with your children, but that doesn't mean you always enjoy your time with them. And maybe you don't have time to enjoy with them, right? So both are fair. And we're going to dive more deeply into that in a moment. So all of this was sitting in my mind when I later met with my friend who was quite unhappy and basically told me like she's not happy in her life. I was like, So the first thing I thought was, okay, relationships, right? Relationships, because of what Waldinger just said, like relationships are the key. And I was like, okay, well, how are your relationships doing, right? She was like, well, like, and she said that her marriage is fantastic. She's just as in love today as she was, when they first met. And I was like, oh, that's awesome, right? And then, we didn't dive too much into all her relationships, but she has a good relationship with her son and whatever. So then I, drew a bit from my own work that I do with my fulfilled life clients and was like, well, and also what I know about her, right? I go, might it be that you're not feeling like you're making progress in your life? Because feeling like you're making progress, growing, is absolutely essential. It's another essential component to feeling fulfilled, being happy in life. And she's like, oh, yeah, definitely not. Like, she has a great job, but she's like, it's very stagnant where she is in life right now. And she doesn't see a future in her work. And this is where things kind of got more like inner work. Because of my background in trauma, we started talking about basically she didn't feel like she deserves to progress in life, like she basically has a self-sabotaging part that doesn't allow her to really progress in ways that are meaningful to her. She'll do things for her family, she'll do things for other people, but not for herself. And then we started touching upon, self-esteem and self-worth. And I was like, sounds like you kind of have like a self-worth issue there. And she was like, oh yeah, like I hate myself. And I was like, oh, okay. We've got something here. Hold on, right? So we started talking about that a little bit. And it's not uncommon, right? The interesting issue that came up, if you've got a self-worth issue that's pretty severe, you're not going to do things for your own benefit. A part of you will, because, and this is where we kind of digressed into like talking about parts therapy type of stuff. The part of you that will show up to therapy, for example, or the part of you that'll show up to coaching, or they'll show up to the gym, or will cook a healthy meal. That's the part of you that will take care of you, and that part actually loves you, even though someone in the situation may not feel that way. There is still that part. And then there's this bigger part that's active right now, especially when you're in a lousy state. That is what one might see as a self-sabotaging part. And practically speaking, it does totally sabotage you, right? Now, just drawing on my therapeutic experience, I explained to her how that these parts, especially this type of protective part, and she was like, protective? How is this protective, right? It's like, well, because when you're a kid, right, your number one mission as a child, by the way, is to stay alive. And the way we're programmed to stay alive is to gain love from our caregivers. And we must feel loved and accepted and have their approval for our survival. So that's what we seek. And if, depending on your caregiver, like if they're abusive or if they're just like really strict or really negative or very hard on you, you could develop a part that's protective that will put yourself down, shut yourself down, so that you can gain their approval and love, therefore survive. So, for example, if you like to sing and dance as a kid, right? And your father is like, stop that. That's super annoying. Like, shut up or whatever, right? Then, you're like, oh, that part will then start to criticize you later when you try to like, what are you doing? Why are you being so stupid or so silly or whatever? Well, silly. They'll probably be meaner, right? Why are you being so stupid? And it will criticize you and put you down, make you small, so that you don't offend that caregiver, right? So in this case, like your father, for example. So I explained like that's how like a part is created. And then, you could work with parts therapy on that. But what I suggested to her was EMDR. I did EMDR for years with clients, and I still have a small practice on the side. And I said to her, I highly recommend that you do EMDR therapy because you could just wipe that out more quickly, because in my experience, there's been tons of people that came to me who did years and years and years of therapy. And I was, this is controversial, but I'm not an advocate of that. I'm not an advocate of being in therapy for a long time. I'm an advocate of like, if you've got a problem, fix it and let's move on with life, right? And so, an EMDR is one of those tools that does that. So I was like, fix this self-worth thing, because there are other ways. You don't have to do EMDR to fix self-worth. And I've talked about gratitude journals, all these kinds of things. But if you have a part that is sabotaging you so much, you can't even get there, right? I have ways I motivate my fulfilled life clients, but if they're in a place that they're so sabotaging, like my friend was, that you can't even, it's like get to the the pitch or whatever, like when you're playing baseball, to like even swing the bat, then you're in trouble, right? So, and then I said, you could even do self EMDR, right? I have a self EMDR community and stuff that I run. And I said, like, you can even do that. And anyways, so I said, okay, that's one thing. And then she's like, yeah, she's actually deciding to get into therapy, so she'll look into that, right? So that was sort of like the end of our conversation at that point. And I went away. There's a part two. Okay. I went away and I thought about this. Quick pause. So since this conversation is starting to touch on the deeper psychology side of things, I'll mention that alongside with my fulfilled life work, I'm also the founder of Self EMDR. It's a tool I created for people who feel completely stuck and they really need to just like break through and move forward. So if that resonates with you, I'll leave the link in the description, okay? And if you're enjoying the show in general, the Fulfilled Life community is where I take these conversations further and we expand more on the topics that are discussed here. I have monthly debriefs, monthly Q&A, and it's a space where people who are building more fulfilled lives can connect. So both links will be in the description. Okay, back to it. So I walked away from that conversation and I was kind of still like thinking about it because I was like, there's got to be more to that. Like I already knew that my friend was suffering from the progress piece, and I knew that she was blocked because otherwise I would have seen more movement in that area. And I'm happy that she's going to pursue solutions to that. And those blocks, resolving those blocks can take some time. But then I just thought, I wonder if there's more. There's more to that. And remember how I was talking about earlier about relationships, right? That Waldinger was talking about in the study, relationships were the key. And I was like, her relationship with her husband is fantastic. And then I was like, and she's a great mother. I know she really loves her son. And then I thought, I wonder about that, right? About how she's experiencing her motherhood, how if she's enjoying her motherhood. And then I also thought, I also know that she doesn't like ever employ a babysitter and she doesn't have any grandparents around. Therefore, she may not be having the time to enjoy the time she otherwise would enjoy with her husband, right? And I thought about myself because, in fact, when I transitioned, because I used to work exclusively in therapy, right? Before I developed the fulfilled life method and started working with intelligent, capable people who were really striving and feeling great. Well, not feeling great, doing great, but not feeling great, right? Before I made that transition to work with fulfilled life strategies and helping people implement them, that was a time that I started struggling, because I had what I like to refer to as the baby bomb. So when me and my husband had our son, we had a really difficult adjustment period. And of course, we love each other deeply, but not for everybody. But I think for a lot of people, having a child is a huge adjustment. And then I remember that, like, even though I loved my husband and I loved my baby, who's now 5 years old, I wasn't enjoying the time because nothing, we couldn't follow a schedule. Nothing worked out the way I planned. When I wanted to have this type of a moment with my husband, he was off doing another thing. Or we were gonna have this family outing and then there was an unexpected poop. Unexpected poops happen all the time, do they not? At the wrong time. So, and this had like a cumulative effect on top of all the other challenges, right? And that was really painful in my life, the lack of enjoyment, where it's like, oh, I've built the dream life, literally, and I just felt so unhappy. And it was really because I was missing that enjoyment piece that Brooks talks about, which is pleasure, no pleasure there, with people and memories, right? And like, sure, maybe some memories were created, but the pleasure part was missing, right? So and this is like, again, putting it together with what Waldinger was saying about the most important thing that they discovered through this 75 plus years of studying people about, didn't matter their background. What made people happy was the having close relationships, right? But then it's like, you have like my friend who has a great marriage, wonderful son, and then myself included, but not enjoying life, right? So like, what was up with that? And it was really, it's like, well, maybe you're not enjoying the time you spend with these great relationships, these wonderful, close relationships, right? So then I was like, I called her up. I'm like, hey, you want to come over for lunch? I was thinking about our conversation and I was like, so I started asking her and I said, like, I had a hypothesis about this enjoyment piece. And I assume you would enjoy time with your husband, but you're not getting it, right? And she was like, that's totally it. Like, no, we like never can do anything. It's so frustrating. Like, we're like miles apart. It's like horrible. So it's like here we have this great relationship, but it's not playing out as great. It's not being experienced as great in the moment because you're not enjoying it. You're not structuring your life in such a way. I'm like, dude, you need to invest in a babysitter. Like, this is a priority. Forget the finances. It's like, oh, but we have to, interview the right person. We don't have that. We want it to be family. I was like, I went through this. I didn't have family close by, and there are solutions. But the more important thing is you got to identify the problem, and then when you identify the problem, you got to understand that this is important. This is an important problem because it's between you and your happiness. And people often think like, well, like happiness is like an afterthought. It's like it's something I'll get later as a reward for something, right? Like, oh, I'll build my business, or I'll have this kid, or I'll get married, or whatever, and then I'll be happy. But then there's a lot of reasons why that doesn't happen. We sometimes can enjoy the reward briefly and then it fades away. And this is like obviously habit patterns in the brain of how we operate, right? And the other part is the practical piece of how we organize our lives, that we're not prioritizing the happiness. And you got to know what to prioritize and how to prioritize it. So with her husband, it was pretty easy because they actually get along. That's not an easy thing to solve, but that's also solvable. But anyways, in this case, it was like, you need to get a babysitter. But then there was the other part was like, well, what about your relationship with your son? And that was when the big can of worms sort of opened up. And I was like, oh, I'm just so frustrated, because he's a little kid. He's like, 3, 4 years old, and doing all the testing and all that kind of stuff. And that can be really, really challenging. And she just hasn't made time for herself. Like, of course, she doesn't view it that way. She feels like she has no choice. Like, I have to be there for the kid. I have to be there for the husband. I have to work. There's just so many responsibilities. But then how are you showing up, right? Like, you want to be the best mother, but how are you showing up when you're not taking care of yourself, right? And how is that impacting your son? Like, oh, let's layer on the guilt a little more, right? It's not about layering on the guilt. I think as those of us who are mothers know, we have a good dose of that. It's about, again, recognizing the importance of your happiness. Your enjoyment of life is important. It's important, right? And it is not selfish, because it affects how you show up. It affects the quality of what you give to other people. And it affects your ability to be generous, you know? And after all, it is your life, right? How do you want to experience it? If you're watching this, especially this far, I have a have a suspicion you want to experience a happier version of it, and you want to enjoy it. And that's really what I'm passionate about. Doing that and also helping people do that. So coming back to her, I went on a bit of a tangent there. So we talked about motherhood, right? And her struggles with that. And that's not like it's not the easy fix, but none of these things in life are easy fixes. But if you are smart, intelligent, capable, if you can do things, and I know you can, all you need to do is focus those abilities on this important goal. Realize that this is something that merits your attention and your time and your effort. So, there are parenting skills that you can use. There are investing in giving yourself, meeting your own needs, right? So that you can show up in a better state. There are deliberate ways you can handle people. I'm just gonna give an example. So my mother, love you, Mom. Okay. In the past, I had a difficult time spending certain kind of time with her without getting into details that might offend her. What I want to say is that I recognize what she did like, what she enjoyed, and how she would be able to be in a good mood, in other words, a good state, right? And therefore increase the probability of us enjoying our time together. Because, of course, I love my mother deeply, but seldom had we enjoyed our time together, from the last like 20, 30. And I was like, okay, she loves nature, she loves walks. Let's just try to adjust our time together to include a lot of that and minimize problematic environments and where problematic topics could arise, right? Like how to run my life. So anyways, so I did. And in fact, like those are some of our best moments, our best memories, right? So you can also like manipulate the environment and purposefully select ways you spend time with people that are important to you. You can certainly work on improving relationships when it's necessary and when it's possible. And you can always bring a better self to the situation. But you can also use that little tactic or trick, if you will. Anyways, I digress a little off topic. I apologize. Well, it's not really off topic, but it wasn't what I had planned. This brings us to the core of what I was talking about those two things that are critical and so important for happiness. And those are close relationships where you actually enjoy spending time with those people and feeling like you're making meaningful progress in your life. If you've got those two things going on, you are doing quite well. But I understand that a lot of people, they struggle in these areas. I've struggled in these areas too. And when it comes to the relationship bit, right, that one's really tricky. And it depends on who the relationship is with, right? Like whether it's a parent, whether it's your spouse, your children. There's different things you can do. You can always invest in skill learning, bringing a better you. Like there's so many things you can do within yourself, not just to bring a better you, but in terms of learning how to accept certain things about people and changing your focus. And this is what I want to actually talk about, the very quick way for you to improve any relationship is learning how to control your focus on what you focus on, right? Because what's wrong is always available, and so is what's right. A lot of us have developed habit patterns. Not all of us. My husband is not one of these people. He constantly focuses on what's right. Like he is so lucky. I was like, man, somebody did something right when you were little. Because biologically, like we're actually programmed to focus on what's wrong, like my husband would not have survived, because we're supposed to focus on what's wrong. Evolutionarily, we're supposed to look for trouble and problems and think of solutions, right, to progress, to survive, right? And evolution doesn't care about our happiness or our sense of fulfillment or our deep life satisfaction. These are luxuries that we are now worrying about because we're living longer and we're having, all this time and freedom to worry ourselves to death, right? So we can turn this around. Okay. There's a lot of science on this. There's a lot of progress on this, and there are methods and ways to feel happy now. Coming back to the focus piece, our brains our thoughts actually work by asking and answering questions. The questions are usually like automatic and subconscious, like we're not always aware of these things. But if you try to monitor your thoughts and see what you're actually thinking, you will note and notice that you are actually answering questions. Like, if you're saying like, oh, she's late because blah, 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 blah. The question was, why is she late? Oh, it's because blah, blah, blah. Or like, I'm hungry. Then it's like a silent, what am I going to eat? Oh, I'll just have that snack later, blah, blah, blah. Right? There's all these questions. People also have a program set of questions or a primary question, things that they kind of come back to, like what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong, or like, what are they thinking about me? Or I don't know. You can have fun with this and sort of try to be a little conscious about what you're thinking and then try to reveal what kind of questions you're asking and look for patterns. And what you can do in terms of your relationships is the goal is to change your focus, right? So you want to change your focus on appreciating the person. What do they offer? What do they bring to the table? I mean, if it's a spouse, you chose them. So there are reasons there, even if you're hating them right now, or you're feeling distant or you're feeling hurt. There are things there, right? If it's a family member, you didn't choose them. Okay, I understand that. But everybody brings something to the table, especially if you're choosing to keep them in your life, right? Then there's got to be some reasons there. And there's always something we can appreciate about the person. So it's about redirecting our thoughts to try to purposefully appreciate and look for what's right, what's good. And if you have trouble with that, you can even do a little journal, like I often did this actually when me and my husband, especially when we were struggling, I did an appreciation journal of like writing 3 things I appreciate in the morning and 3 things in the evening. And we even did an exchange at one point for some time where we would tell each other our appreciations about one another, right? And then about your child, right? Like if they're being difficult, they're just being a kid, right? But I understand it can feel like they're they're being difficult. I get that. And oftentimes it's a result of their development, their developmental stage, where they are with their brain, with their skills, with their life, with how they've been parented, with what's gone on in their school environment, etc. Right? And it's easy to sort of misinterpret what's going on for them using our own filters. And it's helpful to take a step back and think about what you appreciate about this being, right? Maybe they're a little being, maybe they're a bigger being. Coming back to the questions piece, a question that I like to ask myself most of the time is how can I enjoy and appreciate life in this moment even more than I do already? And of course, that supposition that I'm already enjoying is kind of built in there, because sometimes I'll ask this question on purpose when I'm not enjoying or not appreciating anything. Everything looks like crap. And then I'm just like, oh yeah, how can I enjoy and appreciate life in this moment even more? Right? And there could be other questions that you could ask, like, what can I appreciate about him or her in this moment? You know, what can I focus on that will bring me joy? What can I remember that makes me happy? This will be over in 10 minutes. Anything, right? We can start with baby steps, but if you continue to practice these things, right? To master these things, to embody these practices, you will shift, right? Your relationships will shift. Your enjoyment in life will shift, because remember, for enjoyment, we need pleasure, people, memory. If you can remember to cue yourself, even in a challenging time, when you're with someone you love, even if you don't feel like love in that moment, to think, what can I appreciate? And then think about the pleasure piece, right? Like, how can I enjoy this? What's pleasurable about this moment? And it might not be about the person, because maybe that's a difficult moment, but then maybe the sun is shining. Maybe I'm alive. Sometimes like I like Tibetan practices, and there's this meditation on meditating on your death, right? And I'm not talking about doing this specific meditation right now, but at first, when I first heard about it, I thought, okay, that's a little bit morbid, right? But then I realized the value of it, because it makes you appreciate life and what you have now. So when it comes to the people I love, sometimes what helps me gain perspective is like thinking about 20 years from now, or 30 years from now, or 40 years from now, thinking of them old and less able, right? Which is kind of sad, you know. Uh, for those of you who've had, aging parents or have seen them pass, or grandparents, that's a difficult thing to do. And you think about, the hard one is to think about your kids being old or older, really old, and just the time that you have now. Like they're not putting their pencil crayons away, or they're not brushing their teeth, right? But this time is limited, right? Your spouse didn't do that thing that you asked them 10 times to do, or is complaining about something and you're really tired, right? Think about in 20 years or 30 years, like, what if they're not there anymore? You know? And sometimes that perspective, that sense of loss, right? Like even just losing that time with them is like, wow, perhaps I'm wasting this precious time I have with this precious person who is irreplaceable, right? And last but not least, the progress piece, right? Because those of you who have the relationships figured out, you're like ahead. You're really ahead because the relationships are kind of the hardest part. The progress piece is something that I do all the time with my fulfilled life clients and my life strategy work. And it's really, if you're able to focus on yourself a little bit and get clarity, it begins with clarity on getting clarity about what you really want in life, what's really important to you. And sometimes we need to take a step back. I do this in our clarity day. We take a whole day to think about our lives from now till end and think about what is really meaningful, like what our values are, what's really important to me. Who do I want to become? Who do I want to be in this life? Now, in the future, 20 years from now, what legacy do I want to leave after I'm gone? How do I want people to remember me? Right? That taps into our deeper why, and our deeper why is our motivation, and that is important, right? Having clarity and having that deeper inner drive tapped in, right? The deeper why, that's what's going to get us through execution, right? And then there's the psychology of execution. For a lot of people, like a lot of my entrepreneurial or professional clients, they're great. They've got great careers. They've done, they're really good at going to law school and things like that, right? So they can get things done. But what about fulfillment? Has that been on the agenda? And that's why I teach my masterclass. It's called the Follow Through Formula for Fulfillment Masterclass, because it's about, okay, there's a whole psychology on how to get things done, by the way, and what stands in the way, like the self-sabotaging piece, for example, with my friend, and many other things. And there's also like environmental pieces. I mean, I teach a whole masterclass, so I'm not going to go in on all of it, but there's environmental pieces we can put in to make things easier. Like if you're going to work out, how can we make this easier? How can we reduce the burdens, right? But the key piece that I want to tell you, that I want to share, is shifting the goal to be fulfillment, shifting the goal to be happiness. Like it's not just chasing a career level or a certain amount of money or like a revenue target in your business, or even like, marriage, family, whatever. Those are all great things, are all important things, nothing wrong with that. But treating happiness, fulfillment, deep life satisfaction as real targets, that's the key. So to wrap it all up, fulfillment isn't just one thing, it's an integration of many pieces. And we discussed today two critical pieces that have been uncovered by science and conversations with my friend. And that is having close relationships where we actually enjoy the time with them and feeling like you're making progress in your life. Okay? And there are methods, there are ways, there are solutions to all of that. As always, I'd love to hear your comments. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. If something in this conversation landed for you, I'd love to know. So please leave your comments in the bottom. And if you want to keep going with these conversations between the episodes, as I mentioned, the Fulfilled Life community is where that happens. The link is in the description. And if you haven't hit subscribe yet, please hit it so that you will not miss what's next.